So, because I do research on the left and right sides of the brain, one of the most common questions, if I get interviewed, one of the first things that come up is, well, how do the left and right sides differ? And I always find myself kind of pausing with this question because it's a really big question. There's a journal called Laterality. It's been around as long as I can remember. It has published thousands of and thousands of articles on how the left and right sides of the brain differ. And yet, and to this date, we haven't really come up with the one kind of way, the simplest way in which the left and right, we know that they differ in their processing. We know that they give rise to different experiences in the world, but we don't know that kind of one simple way they differ. So I'm going to try to do this in a few minutes, and I'm actually going to come up with one way, at least that I think is a simple way of looking at it. So I'm going to go over three things your left brain does so you can kind of recognize when you're in this left brain mode, which is so dominant in our culture. First is language. And so words play a huge part of our existence. And words, because they in many ways shape our reality. We buy in the word, we have uh, arguments about language itself. And so many of the arguments come down to, what do you mean? So we're trying to figure out like a single meaning that the person has, or even when it's something simple as spelling. I went through most of my life believing that there were so many ways you can spell a word. My wife looked at me one day and she's like, no, there's really just one way you can spell a word. And that was kind of an epiphany for me. Like, oh, that's what you mean. That's the way language works. And I explained my 4 grades in my English classes through college. So language and words is one quality, but also categories. Now, categories are fascinating things that the left brain does. When we categorize, what we do is the whole world can be, you know, filled with differences and, everything's as different can be. But when we categorize, we take one thing that a bunch of different things have in common, and then we group them together. We ignore all the ways that they're different, and we just focus on the one thing that they have in common. But the interesting thing about the whole process of categorization is how much it affects just us on our day-to-day lives. Who's friend and who's foe, what's good and what's bad, and um, you know, uh, well, I'll get into the most important thing about categories in just a second. And the third thing, and that I'll discuss about the left brain is beliefs. And so in our culture, we really buy into beliefs in the sense that, if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. And when we get to beliefs, that really shows the quality that underlies all three of these words, categories, and beliefs all have this one thing in common. And it's that decisive decision making judgment to draw that line in the mental sand and say, you know, this is this and this is not this. And so when we talk about words, again, there's one way to spell a word, and there's one meaning that this word has. When we talk about categories, there's a think about white and black. I mean, they're about as opposite as you can get, but there's an infinite number of shades of gray in the middle. And at some point, the left brain comes along and makes that judgment and says, no, no, this is white, and then this is black. And the same with beliefs. I mean, well, which belief are you going to buy into? The left brain has to make that judgment and has to make that decision and say, okay, well, this is the belief. This is the one thing. It's this infinite landscape around us, and the left brain picks one belief and it buys into that and ignores all the rest. So the notion of judgment is the one quality of the left brain that kind of you can see in all these three processes I just described. It's in language, it's in categories, and it's in beliefs. So whenever we're making a judgment and we feel definitive about it and we really take it seriously, you can almost guarantee you're talking about a left brain process. Now, what do we do with all this? Well, recognizing it is a really important thing. But when we when we think about the decision-making process, and psychologists have studied this quite a bit, how do we make these important decisions? How do we make important judgments? Well, if we could open up the hood and we could really look to see how the left brain does this, most of it's outside of our awareness. We're not even sure how the left brain's doing this because most of it was, well, quite frankly, programmed by our culture. We don't really even have a choice. It just happens very automatically. So let's take language, for example. So I've got two practices I want to end this on. And the first is something about language and how automatic and programmed so much of language has become. So I've got a kind of a challenge for you. So I'm going to put something up on the screen, and I want you to look at it, but I don't want you to read it. Okay? Okay? Did that work or did it not work? So chances are you probably find yourself unable to look at it without reading it. Because in the same way that the left brain makes these judgments automatically, all the other functions of the left brain happen at a very automatic level. The line in the sand, where what becomes inside one category and not another, and what the beliefs that we have. So the second challenge I've got for you is to pick any belief that you have and not believe it. So, I mean, that may take a little while for you to work on, but so that is your left brain in a couple minutes. It deals with words, categorization, and beliefs. But under all of these is the idea that the left brain is making a judgment. It's picking one out of the many, and it's very serious about buying into this. And once it makes its decision, um, you know, that's it. I mean, there's no going back. And that's why we feel right all the time. So the left brain gives us that sense that, wherever we've drawn that line in the mental sand, the left brain, it had to be built into the mechanics, or else you can't make a decision if you think you're wrong. So that you can't make a judgment if you think you're wrong. So like think about it like, you know, in a courtroom, the judge hits that down and that becomes truth. And that's the way the left brain works. And so that's chapter 2, summarized really very quickly for you. And we'll move on to chapter 3 tomorrow.